a derivation of the Nietzschean mythos, um, where mythos is what was prior to logos, perhaps not according to the Greeks or the Hellenes as such, but perhaps according to a few amongst the Greeks, Socrates, Plato, and maybe a line of 30 or 40 in the academy after Plato, or in whatever various mutations this which was established by Plato has produced as a massive life about it as offspring. We have not just this origin, but we have again in Ereignis, or an origin presented in this so-called quote-unquote end of philosophy, as it's often called. So Heidegger said Nietzsche was the last philosopher. That implies Nietzsche was still a philosopher, but that at other times he says maybe Nietzsche wasn't doing philosophy anymore, just as maybe Kierkegaard wasn't doing philosophy anymore. Kierkegaard, whose work became powerful about the year 1900, when Heidegger was still too young to be studying philosophy, but was probably in some way absorbed this as mother's milk, as Leo Strauss would put it, as something that he couldn't question, that which he grew into. The Dossmann, according to his own version, which in some way corresponds to everything which is not the Knight of Faith in Kierkegaard, not the enlightened being, not the being that has stepped out of the narthex and stepped into the messianic time, which the music of Palestrina, with its innovations, which drowned out the plain song, and which caused a great havoc among the schoolmen at the time, in the papal councils, was meant to be the vehicle to beatitude. In other words, the Knight of Faith is a kind of beatitude, but a very one with a peculiar individualistic strangeness in its comprisal, one which we can't grasp so far as it belongs to someone else. This formation that Heidegger grew into around Nietzsche, we can see in the claim of Nietzsche that nihilism is not something like Zizek or Bartleby, a kind of cadaverous, mal-colored flesh, but rather it's something with the living strength to it. It's a particular, as it were, manifestation of life, or mask that life wears. Dionysus is the only god who has for his face a mask. This versicolor, grotesque, both the Iron and the one who the Peter Falk, or the Socrates, who is an Iron, and also the boaster, the common boasters, who comprise the greater number of the political persons who Socrates comes into contact with. From within this horizon, nihilism simply seems like whatever is willing to challenge everything, and therefore Nietzsche says also logic. So then I just use the word mythos in order to say what was before it, merely historically, but according to the notion of the arche, which anyway we could still use to talk to ourselves. The arche doesn't mean in Anaximander the earlier thing in a supposed line of effective time, but it means the most originary support. It means the primordial support, not something where we already have an interpretation about an empirical line of time, which anyway would have to be envisaged right now when we think about it, just like something behind us that I can't right now see, except maybe in the reflection of the phone face, is we have to represent it to ourselves, just as the physicist says, all these things happen long before there are human beings, therefore there's objectivity. But then this objectivity of it's a pure representation for the human being. Something we can understand, but not an entity we can actually point at unless there is a hot tub time machine. What's the thing about the there is a Christmas, but in any case, we have here a very effective force in this Ereignis. So the Ereignis Heidegger brings is his account of what is the breakout of metaphysics, of philosophy, and it's in a way like nihilism, except that it has such a positive course and it seeks for what it calls the truth of being. It shows us an immediate building up of something positive. So for instance, one speaks all the time of Heidegger's interest in death, and this maybe it has to do with Kierkegaard and Sinn, Sein und Zeit, and this is supposed to be a positive feature of Heidegger's teaching, almost as though he had a kind of Wissenschaft. This is, if you follow this and you're consistent, then you have some terms that you can work with, and one of them is the existential and the existential, and etc., etc. And one of the main themes that gives an avenue of invasion into the actual practice of the originary phenomenology, or phenomenology simply means almost something the same as nihilism, in the sense of it's that which refuses all mere claims to knowledge, but seeks direct investigation, so that it must brush aside everything first, all already standing things which somebody else has in some way told us is good enough, that we've inherited, whether it be a claim about number, measurable number being the language of the universe, whether, and therefore physics has somehow a status of a genuine communion with the Godhead and the knowledge in the Godhead, etc. Whatever notions we've inherited, we may not fully have taken over on our own, as someone standing on our own 2 feet. If not, then they need to be brushed aside. So in a way, this is simply the healthy meaning of nihilism, and therefore this is why also Nietzsche has said nihilism isn't the final stop. It's just a moment when you do some housekeeping, and the brooms, on the cows that Hermes is stealing are working double time to conceal the path, but you have to break through that because it's those that the herd of cattle which moved by and it really left tracks, but then it was just brushed over. That theft is what Christopher Bolus calls an introject, and it's a kind of extractive introject, he calls it. So something was stolen, but it was covered up, and it was made to seem as though it were natural. One example would be somehow shaming somebody verbally in a way that the person, especially if it's a young person, gets the feeling that they're the ones that at fault. They've done something wrong, whereas somebody else, the same attempt to show them out as the guilty party, would simply fail. Words can set us up in a way that conceals things, and this kind of ground is what, in a way, nihilism, in order to be healthy, just like a kind of psychoanalytic practice, wants to clean up. So that then Nietzsche also speaks of the philosophers of the future who would come afterwards, who are almost, in a way, that's where it seems again like Nietzsche is simply coming back to a Platonism. But he just wants to clean the house that's grown in the last 2,400 years of all the detritus that's gotten in the way.